The cold air burned against her skin as the alien girl stumbled forward, pushed by rough hands. Chains rattled with every step she took. Her breath came out in sharp gasps, and her heart pounded in her chest like a drum of war. She knew where this path ended. Every story she had ever heard, every whisper in the dark caves of her people, spoke the same truth. Humans never showed mercy. She tried not to look ahead, but her eyes betrayed her. In front of her stood the figure she feared most, a human. His shadow stretched long on the ground, dark and heavy, as if even the sun bowed to his presence. His face was unreadable, his stance firm, and in his hand was a weapon that could end her life in one strike. The girl's knees weakened. Her people had always told her this was how it would end. Humans were destroyers, hunters who saw aliens as prey. Her lips trembled, but she lifted her chin anyway, refusing to fall apart in front of her enemy. If this was her final moment, she would face it with eyes open. The human's boots crunched against the stone as he stepped closer. She flinched at the sound, chains digging into her wrists as she pulled back out of instinct. Her throat was dry, but her mind screamed the same words again and again. This is death. This is the end. The silence stretched, sharp and painful. Around them, no voices spoke, no wind stirred. Even the world seemed to hold its breath. The human finally raised his weapon. Her chest tightened, her breath froze. The girl braced herself, squeezing her eyes shut, expecting fire, pain, or the sharp sting of death, but the moment never came. Instead, the sound she heard was different. Metal shifting. A low click. Slowly, her eyes opened, and she saw the weapon, lowering. Its deadly edge no longer pointed at her chest. Confusion filled her. She blinked hard, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. The human was close enough now that she could see his eyes. Clear, sharp, but not cruel. No fire burned in them. No hatred glowed. Only something strange. Something she had never been told to expect. His voice broke the silence. Calm, steady. Human words, yet heavy with meaning. She could not understand all of them, but his tone told her enough. He was not here to kill her. Her chains clinked as she shifted, stepping back. She wanted to believe it, but belief was dangerous. Fear clung to her ribs like a second skin. Why would he lower his weapon? Why would a human enemy of her kind let her live? The human crouched slightly, lowering himself to her eye level. He was not towering above her now, not pressing down with power. For the first time she saw him not as a monster, but as a man. Her heart pounded faster, but the rhythm had changed. No longer only fear, but something else. Something she could not name. Still, she prepared herself for betrayal. Humans were clever. Humans were cunning. Perhaps this was his way to trick her, to make her lower her guard before he struck. Her jaw tightened. She swore she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The silence between them grew heavy again, yet it no longer felt like the silence of death. It was something uncertain, something new. The human extended a hand, not with force, not to strike but open, palm upward as if offering something unseen. Her chest rose and fell, every breath shaking. She stared at the hand, unsure. In her mind, two voices fought. One shouted of danger, of blood and betrayal. The other whispered of a chance, a path her people had never spoken of, a choice she had never thought possible. The chains around her wrists felt heavier than ever, but for the first time, the weight of her fear began to shift. Was this death, or was this something else? The moment stretched, balanced between past and future, between despair and hope. She braced herself not for the end, but for the unknown. Because whatever this human chose to do next would not only decide her fate, it would change her forever. The girl did not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the human's open hand. Every story she had ever heard told her this was a trick, a cruel game before the end. Humans were hunters, killers, destroyers of her kind. Why would he stop now? Why would he show mercy? Her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. The cold chains dug deeper into her wrists, reminding her she was still a prisoner, still at the mercy of the enemy. Fear whispered that if she took even a step forward, the weapon might rise again. Yet there was something in his eyes, steady, calm, and strangely soft, that unsettled her more than the thought of death. The human spoke again, his voice low and even. She did not know all the words, but she understood enough. He was not here to kill her. The way he tilted his head, the way his hand stayed open, waiting, not forcing, everything about him contradicted what she believed to be true. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, carefully, the human set his weapon aside on the ground. The sound of metal against stone echoed in the silence. The girl's breath caught. He had just given up his power to strike. That made no sense. She pulled back, eyes narrowing. "Why?" she whispered, though she doubted he would understand her. The word slipped out before she could stop it, raw with fear and confusion. The human did not answer in words she knew, but the small shake of his head, the faint sigh that escaped his lips, told her more than any language could. He was not her executioner. Not today. Her mind raced. What does he want from me? If not her life, then what? Was he planning to use her, trade her, or save her? The last thought frightened her most of all, because hope was more dangerous than fear. The human reached to his side and pulled out something small. She tensed, thinking it was another weapon, but it was only food. A thin pack, torn open with rough hands, revealing dry rations. He placed the food on the ground between them and stepped back. Her stomach twisted painfully. Hunger burned through her like fire. She had not eaten in days, maybe longer. Yet she did not move. She kept her eyes locked on him, waiting for the moment his mask would drop and his cruelty would show, but the cruelty never came. He simply stood there, quiet, watching, not as a predator watches prey, but as one soul looks at another. Her body betrayed her. Her hands shook as she reached out, fingers brushing the food. She pulled back once, twice before finally snatching it and clutching it tight. Her chains rattled with the sudden movement. She half expected him to strike, but he didn't. Instead, he sat down on the stone floor across from her. His weapon still lay on the ground untouched. He leaned against the wall and lowered his gaze, as if to show her he was no threat. The girl's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She brought the food to her lips, eating in quick, desperate bites. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, not because of kindness, not because of fear, but because she realized something she had never imagined possible. A human had chosen not to kill her. Her people had always spoken of humans as monsters, without hearts. Yet the man sitting in front of her looked nothing like the beast of her nightmares. His face carried scars, his eyes carried weight, but none of it spoke of joy in her suffering. If anything, he looked tired, worn, a man who had seen too much and carried too heavy a burden. The food in her hands tasted bitter and dry, but in that moment it was more precious than gold. With every bite, her mind shifted further from the lies she had been told. Doubt crept in, soft but steady. Still she did not trust him. Not yet, she could not. Trusting him would mean betraying everything she had believed, everything her people had endured. But one truth was now undeniable. The human had made a choice. He had chosen mercy over death, and that choice had already begun to change her. She finished eating. Her eyes drifted back to him. He had not moved. His weapon still lay far from his reach. His gaze met hers for only a second, and in that moment she saw something that frightened her more than his strength, more than his weapon. She saw humanity, and for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the stories she had been told were wrong. The food rested heavy in her stomach, but the fear inside her did not fade. Even as warmth spread through her tired body, her mind whispered sharp warnings. Do not believe him. Do not fall into the trap. The girl sat with her back pressed against the cold stone wall, her eyes fixed on the human across from her. He had not touched his weapon again. He had not raised his voice. Instead, he sat quietly, watching the ground, as if the silence between them was enough. But silence was dangerous. Silence left too much space for thoughts, and her thoughts carried her back to memories she wanted to forget. She remembered her village, the fires that burned, the screams of children pulled from their homes, the heavy footsteps of soldiers, human soldiers, crushing everything in their path. She remembered the cries of her mother, the helpless rage of her father before he fell. She had hidden in the shadows, trembling, hearing her world end. Every scar on her heart whispered the same truth. Humans destroy. Humans take. Humans leave. Nothing but ashes. Now one of them sat only a few steps away, his hands empty, his gaze strangely calm. She hated how much that calm unsettled her. Why wasn't he acting like the monster she had been told about? Why wasn't he striking her down? Her fingers dug into the chains at her wrists until the metal cut her skin. Pain grounded her. Pain reminded her not to believe the lies of kindness. She had seen kindness before, once. A soldier who had spared a child in her village. For a moment, they had thought mercy was possible. But hours later, that same soldier returned with fire and blade. The girl shuddered at the memory. She would not be fooled again. The human lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. His gaze was steady, not cold but searching. She turned away, refusing to give him what he sought. He would not see her weakness. Still, his presence pressed against her like an invisible weight. Every movement he made, every sound of his breathing pulled at the edges of her thoughts. She wanted to believe he meant no harm. She wanted to believe mercy could exist, but to believe was to risk everything. Her chains rattled as she shifted, pulling her knees close to her chest. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. "Why?" she asked again, though she knew he would not understand. Her own language felt broken on her tongue. The word was less a question and more a wound. The human tilted his head as though he recognized the weight of her voice, if not its meaning. He did not move closer. He did not try to touch her. Instead, he remained where he was, patient, like a stone unmoved by the storm. Patience was worse than cruelty. Patience gave her hope, and hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. Her body shook with quiet tremors she tried to hide. She wanted to stand, to run, to escape this strange balance between fear and safety. But the chains bound her, and even if they didn't, where would she go? The world beyond was harsh, unforgiving. Alone, she would not survive long. The truth clawed at her. She was trapped not by chains alone, but by the mercy of the very human she feared. Her fate now rested in his hands, and that thought was unbearable. Her eyes flickered to his weapon lying on the ground. The thought came unbidden. If she could reach it, maybe she could end the uncertainty. One strike, and she would no longer wonder if his mercy was real or false. One strike, and the fear would end. But the thought faded almost as quickly as it came. She did not move. Some part of her, buried deep, did not want to kill him. That frightened her more than anything else. The human finally spoke again, his voice quiet, steady, carrying words she could not fully understand. Yet the tone was clear. It was not a command, not a threat. It was something closer to reassurance. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. The sound of his calm voice made her chest ache. She hated how it chipped away at the wall she had built inside. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. Her people had always told her mercy was a lie, but as she sat chained in the shadows, staring at the human who had spared her life, she felt a war raging inside her heart, and though fear still ruled her, a single forbidden thought kept rising through the noise. What if they were wrong? The night grew colder. The stone walls trapped the chill, and every breath of the alien girl came out in a trembling cloud. She wrapped her arms around herself, chains biting into her wrists. Hunger no longer tore at her belly, but the cold pressed harder with each passing hour. Across the small fire, the human sat in silence. His figure was still, his face half hidden in shadow. The flames painted his scars in shifting lines of orange and gold. He looked strong, dangerous, everything her people had warned her of, yet he had given her food, yet his weapon still lay out of reach. The girl's teeth chattered. She tried to hide it, pulling her knees close to her chest, but the sound betrayed her. Her body shivered uncontrollably, as if mocking her willpower. The human's eyes lifted, toward her. She froze, holding her breath, waiting for judgment, waiting for the cruelty she knew had to come. But instead he moved slowly, reaching behind him. From a worn pack he pulled out a thick cloth. He stood, crossed the small space, and without a word, draped it across her shoulders. The fabric was rough but warm. The scent of smoke and earth clung to it, and for the first time in days, her body eased against the cold. She wanted to push it away, to spit on this strange kindness, but her hands did not move. Her body betrayed her again, leaning into the warmth. She stared at him with wide eyes, searching for the trick. But the human only gave a small nod and returned to his place by the fire. No words, no demands, just a quiet act of mercy. The girl's chest tightened. This was worse than cruelty. Cruelty she understood. Mercy left her lost. Hours passed. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long. The human shifted, tossing another piece of wood into the flames. The sparks rose, and for a moment, she caught the lines of his face more clearly. His expression was not hard. It was tired. A weariness deeper than age carved into every scar, every crease around his eyes. She wondered if humans felt pain the way her people did. She wondered what battles had marked him, what losses weighed on his shoulders. It was a dangerous thought. She quickly pushed it away. Still her gaze kept drifting back to him. Every movement he made contradicted the stories she had grown up with. He did not lash out when she stumbled. He did not sneer at her weakness. He had given her food, warmth, and space. Even when his eyes met hers, there was no hunger in them, no cruelty. Her mind fought against the truth her eyes saw. Fear built walls inside her, but doubt slipped through the cracks. As dawn touched the sky with pale light, the human rose. He strapped his pack over one shoulder and picked up his weapon. She flinched at the sight of it, heart racing, but his hand never pointed it at her. Instead, he glanced toward the world beyond the stone walls, then back at her. He spoke a few words in his language. She could not understand them, but his tone carried weight, steady, firm, almost protective. Then he moved toward the heavy door, opening it with a low groan of metal. Morning air rushed in, sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The girl blinked at the light. She had expected chains forever, darkness without end, but he was leading her out. Her legs trembled as she rose. The chains still held her wrists, but her steps carried her forward. The human walked ahead, his posture alert, scanning the trees as if guarding her path. Every step outside twisted her fear into confusion. Why would a captor lead his prisoner into open ground, where escape was possible, unless he did not see her as a prisoner at all? The thought was dangerous. She tried to bury it, but it followed her with every step into the forest. As they walked, her eyes caught small details. When the cold wind whipped through the trees, he shifted his coat tighter around her shoulders. When the ground grew rough, he slowed his pace so she could keep up. When her foot caught on a root and she nearly fell, his hand reached out. Not to grab, not to chain, but to steady. Then he let go. Every gesture was simple, but every gesture carved deeper cracks into her fear. By the time the sun rose high, the girl's heart was in conflict. Her chains reminded her she was not free. Her scars reminded her humans were enemies. Yet every action of this man spoke of something her people had never told her: humanity. That night, when they rested again by the fire, she did not pull away from the warmth of the cloth he offered. She still did not speak, still did not trust. But when her eyes closed, sleep came easier than it had in many nights. And in the quiet of her dreams, the walls of fear that had always protected her began to crumble. The forest around them was alive with sound, Branches creaked in the wind, strange creatures cried in the distance, and shadows shifted like predators waiting to strike. The alien girl walked close behind the human, her chains dragging softly against the earth. Every step reminded her of captivity, yet every step also showed her something new. He was not dragging her. He was not pulling her by force. She followed because he moved forward, and some part of her chose to keep moving with him. When the path grew steep, the human slowed so she would not fall behind. When the ground cracked beneath her, his hand reached out to steady her. And then, just as quickly, he let go. Each small act left her unsettled. If he wanted her as a prisoner, why show such care? If he wanted her dead, why spare her again and again? Her thoughts tangled like knots. Fear told her to run, but instinct whispered that staying near him meant safety. As the sun lowered, the forest grew darker and more dangerous. The human stopped at a clearing, scanning the edges of the trees with sharp eyes. His posture was tense, alert, like a hunter protecting his ground. The girl wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cold, watching him work. He gathered wood, built a fire, and prepared a small camp. When night fell, the fire's glow pushed back the darkness. But the forest did not rest. Growls echoed from somewhere deep within the shadows. The girl stiffened, her body trembling. Her people had always feared the creatures that roamed at night, and now their cries felt closer than ever. The human heard them too. His weapon was in his hands now, not pointed at her but ready against the unseen dangers. He stood firm, shoulders straight, his eyes scanning the dark. She realized then that the firelight made him a target, yet he showed no fear. He stood between her and the shadows as if it were his duty. For the first time, she did not see him as her captor. She saw him as her shield. The growls grew louder and her heart raced. She pressed herself back against the rock behind her, her chains rattling in her panic. A shadow moved in the tree line, glowing eyes watching. She wanted to scream, but before she could, the human raised his weapon and fired. The blast tore through the night and the creature fled with a shriek. Silence followed, broken only by the ringing in her ears. The human lowered his weapon, his face calm but focused, as if this was nothing new to him. The girl stared at him, wide-eyed. He had not just spared her. He had protected her. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. This moment carved something new inside her. For so long she had believed humans only brought death. Yet here he was, risking his own life to keep her safe. Later, when the danger passed, he sat by the fire again. She remained on the other side, still bound by her chains, still cautious. But her eyes kept drifting toward him. His face looked tired, his movements slow, but his presence was steady, unshaken. The firelight flickered across his scars. She wondered what battles he had fought, what losses he carried. She wanted to ask, but the words never came. Instead, silence filled the space between them, a silence that no longer felt heavy with fear. Her body leaned slightly toward the warmth of the fire, toward the safety of his presence. She hated herself for it, but she did not pull back. As the night stretched on, she realized something had changed. It was not trust, not yet, but the first fragile thread of it. She had seen proof that he was not like the stories told to her people. He could have let the creature take her. He could have left her to die. Instead, he chose to stand in front of her, weapon in hand, as if her life mattered. When she finally closed her eyes to sleep, the sound of his steady breathing filled her ears. For the first time since her capture, she did not dream of fire and destruction. She dreamed of something else, something fragile, something dangerous. She dreamed of hope. The fire burned low, its glow fading into embers. The forest around them had grown quiet after the night's danger, as if the shadows themselves were resting. The alien girl sat close to the flames, her knees pulled to her chest, the human's cloth still draped around her shoulders. She did not dare admit it, but she no longer shivered from the cold. Across from her, the human sat in silence. His weapon rested against a stone, within reach but untouched. His gaze was fixed on the fire, but his eyes looked far beyond it, lost in some place she could not see. For a long time, neither spoke. The girl's mind twisted with questions she could not silence. Why had he spared her? Why had he protected her against the creatures in the dark? Why did he give her food, warmth, and safety when he had no reason to? At last, she found her voice. Her words were soft, broken, but full of weight. Why me? He lifted his head, his brows furrowed as he tried to understand. Slowly, carefully, she touched her own chest, then pointed at him. Why, me? This time he understood. His jaw tightened, and his shoulders tensed. For a moment she thought he would stay silent again. But then he spoke, his voice deep and steady, carrying a pain that did not need translation. She did not understand all the words, but fragments reached her. Loss, family, child. His hand clenched into a fist, and his eyes darkened as he stared into the fire. The girl tilted her head, listening harder. His voice shook once, then steadied. He raised a hand and traced a line across his chest as though showing a wound that no longer bled but never healed. His other hand moved slowly, mimicking the small height of someone, a child. His eyes softened, full of memory and sorrow. Her breath caught. A child. He had lost someone. The pieces came together in her mind. He had once stood where she stood, now watching life stolen away. He had once felt powerless against cruelty, against loss, and when he saw her, chained and broken, he could not strike. He would not repeat the same mistake. The human's gaze finally lifted, meeting hers across the fire. For the first time she did not look away. Her people had always told her humans had no heart, yet she saw his heart in that moment, scarred, burdened, but alive. His mercy had not been weakness. It had been choice, a choice born from pain too deep to ignore. The girl's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him she understood. But her voice failed her. Instead, she lowered her eyes, her fingers brushing the edge of the cloth he had given her. She held it tighter, as if holding his truth along with it. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full, heavy, with the weight of shared wounds. When the night deepened further, the human leaned back against the stone wall and closed his eyes. His breathing grew slow, steady. He had given her his story, and now he rested unguarded, his weapon still by his side but untouched. The girl stared at him, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She thought of her village, of the fires and screams, of the cruelty that had shaped her fear, and then she thought of him, sitting across from her, carrying his own loss like an invisible chain. Two enemies bound by pain neither had chosen. Her heart ached with confusion. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled alone. Another feeling had begun to grow, fragile and uncertain. Respect, perhaps even trust. When she finally closed her eyes, her last thought was not of death or betrayal. It was of the human's voice, heavy with sorrow, steady with resolve, a voice that had chosen mercy. And in that fragile moment she realized his choice had not only spared her life, it had given her a new one. The morning sun rose slowly over the forest, spilling light across the clearing where they had rested. Birds called from the branches, their songs sharp and bright against the quiet of dawn. The alien girl sat still, her eyes half closed, watching the rays stretch across the earth. For the first time in what felt like forever, she woke without the taste of terror in her mouth. The human was already awake. He moved with quiet strength, gathering wood, adjusting his pack, scanning the trees for danger. His every action was careful, practiced, like a man who had lived too long in the wild. She watched him in silence, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. When his gaze met hers, she did not turn away this time. His eyes carried no threat, no cruelty, only calm, steady patience. She found herself holding that gaze longer than she expected, and when he finally looked away, something inside her shifted, Her people's voices echoed in her memory. Humans destroy. Humans take. Humans kill. But those words no longer felt solid. They crumbled under the weight of everything she had seen. The food he had shared, the warmth he had given, the protection he had offered, and the truth he had revealed. He had been her captor once. Now he was her shelter. When he motioned for her to follow, she rose without hesitation. Her chains still clinked with each step, yet the sound no longer meant despair. It meant survival. It meant she was still alive to hear them. The path wound, through the trees, sunlight breaking through the leaves. The girl's body ached with exhaustion, but her heart beat with new strength. Every step beside him was proof that life could be different. At one point, the ground broke into a wide river, its waters rushing fast and cold. She froze at the edge, fear clawing at her chest. Her people had drowned in rivers like this, swept away by the current. Chains made it worse. One misstep and she would sink without a chance. The human saw her hesitation. He set down his pack, tested the stones that crossed the river, and then returned to her. Slowly, carefully, he held out his hand. Her breath caught. For a long moment she stared at it, trembling. Fear told her to refuse, to stay where she was, to never trust. But then she remembered the firelight in his eyes, the sorrow in his voice when he spoke of his child, the choice he had made not to end her life. With a shaking hand, she reached out. Their fingers touched. His grip was firm, steady, guiding her across the stones. Step by step they crossed together. Her heart raced, not from fear of the water but from the weight of that touch. When they reached the other side, he let go. She almost wished he hadn't. They continued on, and the forest grew quiet around them. For the first time, she felt the silence as comfort, not as danger. That night, when the fire burned again, she did not sit as far away. The distance between them had shrunk, not in chains but in spirit. She pulled the cloth tighter around her shoulders and whispered words in her own language. She did not know if he understood, but the meaning was simple. Thank you, the human looked at her, and though he did not answer in her tongue, his nod was enough. The girl closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the flames wash over her. She was no longer only a survivor. She was something else now. Someone touched by mercy, someone carrying hope. Her people's stories had been wrong. Humans were not only destroyers, at least not all of them. This one had chosen differently. This one had shown her that compassion could be stronger than cruelty, that mercy could change the course of a life. And it had changed hers. From the moment she expected death at his hands, to the moment she felt safe in his presence, her world had shifted. She was no longer the frightened girl waiting for the end. She was the girl who had seen humanity, and because of him she would never be the same again.